What do you prefer? Sometimes asking the most basic questions can yield some of the most powerful results. So the question, what do I prefer, seems almost ludicrous in a sense, because what do we do all day long? We think about our preferences. We operate out of our preferences. We make choices. We talk about what we prefer, and we talk about what we don't prefer. We like it when things go our way, and we don't like it when things don't go our way. This is so natural to the way we operate that to even discuss it seems a little strange. So in the relative sense, it's pretty obvious there are things we prefer over other things, events we prefer over other events. I like sushi more than I like Italian food. I prefer laying on the beach to being pulled over and getting a ticket. I prefer getting a massage to getting punched in the face. So obviously there are things we prefer in the conventional sense. In the relative sense. In the absolute sense, there are no preferences. There's no one to hold a preference. There's nothing apart to look back at another part and say I like it or I don't like it. There's not contrast. There aren't flavors to compare, and there's no one to compare. There's just what's happening. The flavorless flavor. The flavor of eternity. The flavor of no center. Here there is only one sound, and that's the sound of every sound. And it's also the sound of no sound. There's one taste, one sound, one movement, and that is all encompassing. No distinctions are made. This is the absolute sense, and it's very real. When we start out, we're so fixated in the relative that we don't have that taste of absolute. We don't recognize the absolute nature that is intrinsically here, alive, true, undeniable. So when we wake up to this absolute nature, there's a tremendous relief, a release of the burden of picking and choosing, of being the one that has to decide, of carrying the burden of managing everything, managing life, managing the world, managing all of the relationships, the situations, always holding distance to judge. We suddenly find ourselves completely relieved of that burden. We see that it's really just a trick of the mind. It never existed, that relative self, that one apart. So this is to wake up to the absolute. If we're lucky, we don't rest here long. We begin to recognize the relative as the absolute and the absolute as the relative. And then we sort out moment by moment, situation by situation, sound by sound, movement by movement, conversation by conversation, exactly where relative meets absolute, where inside meets outside, where everything meets one thing. And this endless process occurring not in time and not occurring for someone is the true work of realization. So in this, we start to be able to distinguish between the conventional, simple and innocent preference of one flavor over another flavor. In simple reflection, we can recognize that this character, this collection of tendencies, prefers pizza over vegetables. There's no problem here. There's no weight to that. There's nothing behind it. No one doing the picking and choosing. It's a simple observation. There's no weight to it. It's not held on to. So then the question arises, where does it get heavy? Where do we start holding on? Where does identity start to form when it comes to preference? When is it a simple noticing, a joyous expression of the moment? And when does it start to feel like I have something to do? There's something to manage. I'm starting to stand apart and notice tension, control, contraction. Where does that occur? To whom does that occur? In what set of conditions does it arise? This is the work. Noticing, being alert, watching the movement of mind, noticing when it starts to feel sticky, contracted. What is that contraction made of? What is an expectation made of? What is disappointment made of? Who's pulling the strings? Who's pushing and who's pulling on this experience, this moment? There can be preferences, simply, innocently, without weight, without identity. But when the one who prefers starts to come into play, that's the root of suffering. When we start to feel ourselves pushing against the natural flow of reality, that's when we have our finger on the scale. When there's a preference that starts to feel like my preference, and it starts to feel like something I have to defend, something I have to figure out how to sustain. So then we look, what is it that feels that way? Who is it that feels that way? What if we stop and don't put our finger on the scale? What if we just observe the flow of reality as the flow of reality? What does it feel like to not resist? What does it feel like to spend 1 minute not resisting anything? Just noticing everything, experiencing everything, letting everything move inward and outward. What does it feel like to spend 1 hour not resisting anything, not conjecting that we know a better way than life does? Is it possible? Have you tried it? What if we take reference for what should be from what is? What if we notice this is happening, and thus this is what should be happening? What if we don't make distance from life? What if we don't make distance from just this, just what's happening? What if we don't push against it? What if we don't stand back and judge it? What if we don't believe the echoes of thoughts from the past that say, I know how this is supposed to go? What if we let our will rest? What is equanimity? Equanimity is seeing that what is the only possible thing right now. The only possible set of conditions is the current set of conditions. If we make distance, we're already out of sync. If we stand back and start to judge, manage, control, we're already out of sync for the next moment and the next moment. We're in sync with thoughts now. We're in sync with the stereotyped signature of the ego. We're dancing like a puppet. So how do we stay in sync with the natural flow, with unfiltered reality? We don't make distance. Don't hold back, don't judge. Don't take reference from thought. Only take reference from what is, sound, movement, sensation, the dance of shapes and forms. The intimacy of this flow, the mystery of this. So if we only take reference from this, we can't go wrong. Reality is always here, in Technicolor, 100% of the time. You're not separate from it, and you never have been. Separation isn't even a thing. It's not possible. It's only imaginable. So the challenge is, see how long you can go taking reference from what is, which is immediately available to the senses at all times, as opposed to taking reference from what should be, what could be, or what you're imagining.